Hi, this is Sarah Connolly from the Alcohol Free Lifestyle podcast. Today I am going to cover off the 7 most common questions that I've been asked during the years that I've been coaching people who want to quit alcohol. These 7 questions come up so regularly that I thought it might be helpful to share them with you, because the likelihood is you may have some of the same questions, if not all of them. So the questions are, why have I, specifically, developed a dependence on alcohol? How can some people drink quote-unquote normally and I can't? Why is it so hard to moderate? Can I moderate? Why do I keep going back to drinking? Why does life seem so dull and boring without alcohol? And what are the first steps that I need to take to quit alcohol? So, question number 1, why have I developed a dependence on alcohol? Many of us feel like we are alone in this, that we are the only person that can't seem to drink normally. And we question ourselves, thinking that we are somehow different, that we're weak, or we're a bad person because we've ended up with the feeling that we can't really survive without drinking. So when we realise that there is a dependency, it causes a lot of fear and confusion. What we once did to relax or have fun becomes something that we feel that we have to do, and we can't cope without it. Whilst it is a complex process that does vary from person to person, it is a combination of 4 key factors that include biological, psychological, environmental, and spiritual dependence. So let's first talk about genetics. If you have alcohol use disorder in your family, then you are around 40 to 60% more likely to experience alcohol dependency yourself if you drink enough of it. It's definitely not predetermined. You are not doomed to alcoholism. However, with genetics, we have likely inherited a sensitivity to the substance. What that means is that when we drink, we may feel more effect from alcohol. We may get a higher high. We may feel more energized than people that don't have this genetic predisposition, and therefore we start to associate a higher value with alcohol. So whilst genetics does play a role, it's not a determining factor. It's a combination, as I said earlier, of a whole host of different things. But it is something to be very mindful of, that genetic predisposition does exist. It really does set us up to potentially have our own challenges with alcohol if we don't manage our drinking. Of course, our environment also plays a significant role. If we grow up somewhere where alcohol is used very regularly, where we observe it being used to relieve stress or to celebrate, then we start to create associations with alcohol and those occasions. Broadly, we are products of our environment, so we tend to repeat patterns that are modelled to us. We must also consider the social acceptability of alcohol and the extensive promotion of it as the go-to for both challenges and celebration. All this messaging we take in both consciously and subconsciously, and it plays a significant role in conditioning our psyche into believing it is normal and in many ways expected of us to drink. Peer pressure and societal norms often encourage heavy drinking, and we can easily get caught up in behaviours so that we can feel part of the group, so that we can feel connected to others. And ultimately, it's what we know, it's what's been shown to us as the way to deal with our problems. So it's quite normal if we find ourselves falling into that pattern of just wanting to do what everybody else is doing and ignoring the negative consequences. Mental health is also extremely important when it comes to how we use alcohol, because alcohol is often used as a way of self-medicating. People with certain mental health conditions, things like depression or anxiety or stress-related disorders, can turn to alcohol to find a sense of relief and escape. This naturally leads to a cycle where we become dependent on the substance which actually exacerbates the symptoms that we are trying to treat. So alcohol does work in the short term, of course, but long term it's extremely detrimental and the condition is likely to worsen over time. High stress and trauma also have a significant impact on how we use alcohol. Experiencing significant stresses, trauma, or major life changes can lead to us turning to alcohol as a way to escape or numb any emotional pain. This is often also an unconscious response to discomfort and tends to make the problems that we are trying to avoid much worse in the long term. Our lifestyle choices also play a role, and this is where we as an individual need to take responsibility. When we drink regularly and excessively, we build up what is known as a tolerance. This is where the body is requiring more alcohol to achieve the same effects. We may notice ourselves changing from wine to spirits. And the reason for that is because the wine is no longer giving us enough of a high, and so we start to seek stronger spirits, stronger drinks with higher alcohol content to get the same effect. And tolerance builds up over time to the point where maybe we need to drink more and more often and larger amounts in order to feel like we are getting the effect that we used to get when we just had 1 or 2 glasses of wine. And finally, we have the impact of our neurochemicals. So when we use alcohol in excess, it affects the brain's reward system and over time can lead to changes in our brain chemistry that reinforce alcohol-seeking behaviour. This is what contributes to making it so hard to moderate and also so hard to quit. Those changes in the brain, however, can repair over time for many people. So the good news is that if that has happened and you do feel like you are completely dependent on alcohol, it doesn't have to be your whole story. There is an opportunity to take control and actually rewire the brain and heal the brain so that those neurochemicals come back into balance and we don't feel like we need alcohol to survive. Many people feel like their alcohol use is a sign of a character flaw or some kind of personal weakness, but that is absolutely not the case. As you've seen in the answer to this question, there are so many factors at play, many of which are out of our control. So the most important thing to take from this information is that if you are struggling with an alcohol dependence, it's not your fault. It is a combination of so many different factors that lead us to struggle. The reason that understanding this is so important is because shame and guilt can often be a deterrent to people seeking help. When we truly understand that our alcohol use is not entirely our fault and is a result of so many different factors that are beyond our control, we can start to relieve some of that shame and guilt and understand that whilst it wasn't our fault, it is now our responsibility to take control and make the changes that we need to make in order to free ourselves from our alcohol dependence. The next question is, why can some people seem to drink quote unquote normally and I can't seem to stop once I start? This is a question that frustrates a lot of people because they look at their friends and they think these people, they just seem to be able to take it or leave it. And then we go into shame and think, oh, there's something wrong with me. There are, again, a lot of reasons why some people can moderate or drink normally and some of us can't. These come down to, once again, our genetics, as I mentioned earlier. Also, enzyme levels. So in some of us, the production and activity of certain enzymes that are involved in metabolizing alcohol are different. Some of us have higher levels of alcohol dehydrogenase and also our enzyme levels. Some people metabolize alcohol more slowly than others. If we metabolize alcohol more quickly, the effects of the alcohol wear off more quickly, and therefore we're likely to seek more of it. For those that metabolize alcohol more slowly, they tend to feel the effects of one drink for a longer period of time, so they tend to drink less than other people. They have a lower alcohol tolerance because their body takes longer to process it. So what that might mean is that they feel quite quickly intoxicated or impaired whilst only drinking a small amount. What that leads to often is that you'll find that people like this will say, well, I just feel tired after drinking, or I only need one or two and then that's me done. For those of us that metabolize alcohol more quickly, we tend to feel more energized, more excited. We tend to feel the effects of the alcohol wear off more quickly, and that's why we will try and find another drink as soon as the effects wear off. So it's important to note that even if somebody appears to be able to drink normally, excessive problematic drinking can develop over time, especially if somebody is then exposed to a significant life event or some kind of major stress or trauma. So nobody is immune, I guess, is the point. And if we continue to drink excessively, and when I say excessively, we're not talking about a pint of vodka a day necessarily. It can simply be as much as 1 or 2 glasses of wine a night, or binge drinking on the weekends. We will develop tolerance and we will start to become more and more dependent. One of the most commonly asked questions that come up is, why can't I moderate? Many of us want to be able to be that person that can just have 1 or 2 drinks and be satisfied. The reality is, for many of the reasons that I've already shared, moderation can be very hard for people with a genetic predisposition to alcohol use disorder, people with the enzymes that metabolize alcohol more quickly, and also certain peer groups and pressures that we may find ourselves under, and potentially certain changes to the brain's reward circuitry. The way I like to see it is that once we've had a fairly decent drinking career, our brain chemistry is significantly altered so that there is almost a dormant dependency that just stays there. And even when we're not drinking, it's still there waiting to be activated again. What happens is that we may be able to take periods of time off drinking. We may take a month off here, a month off there. But what we find is that when we pick up the next drink, we are almost back to drinking as much, if not more, than we were drinking before. So if you can imagine that you've had a month off alcohol and then you decide, right, I'm going to go back to drinking mindfully and I'm going to moderate, and you have every intention in the world, but then you pick up a drink, and even though that drink is the only one that you intended to have, it kind of wakes up the beast in the brain. And because we are historically used to having 5, 6 drinks, the brain starts to anticipate the next one. And the chemicals start to fire up, the dopamine, serotonin, and they start to become very powerful in the form of craving for another drink. Once that brain chemistry is altered, it's incredibly hard for us to go back to just having 1 or 2. We use the terms switch and dial. Some people are dials, and they can dial their drinking up or down depending on the day, depending on the mood. For others, we are more like switches. And once that switch gets turned on and all those brain chemicals get fired up, it's incredibly hard for us to switch it off again. It's not bad news if you find it hard to moderate, because ultimately what that means is that you have the opportunity to stop and stay stopped, knowing that you can't be somebody that just has 1 or 2. I find that very helpful because it takes away a lot of the inner negotiation and uncertainty. I've made the decision that I simply can't drink, that alcohol and I are a terrible mix, and that's not all my fault. I've inherited a lot of that along the way. So when moderation is no longer an option for you, try and see that as an opportunity for change. Because if we don't change, our tolerance levels will get higher and higher, and our need for more and more alcohol will just keep getting worse. So there's nothing wrong with you that you can't moderate. It's not a question of willpower. It's a question of biochemistry. And this is something that we cannot control. Accepting this can be very, very challenging, but it can also create the pathway for genuine freedom. When we accept this, it can be very challenging. However, it is also the segue to making a decision and realizing that our inability to moderate is our opportunity for freedom from alcohol.
James here. Pardon the interruption. I just wanted to share some of the results that many of our Project 90 clients have been generating in their life because of not drinking alcohol for at least 90 days. Indipal Johal from California says, I'm having more fun alcohol-free. Victoria from Colorado says, I'm feeling so much happier and positive. Craig from Washington says, I feel more freedom. And John from New York says, I'm feeling so much happier. If you'd like to get your self-confidence back, if you'd like to have more joy, more peace, more happiness in your life, and you are ready and willing to get outside professional support to get off the stop-start cycle with your drinking, join a like-minded community, and finally nip this drinking issue in the bud, then I invite you to go to alcoholfreelifestyle.com/project90, read through, watch through all the details, and if it feels in alignment, then you can schedule a 15-minute exploratory call with one of our coaches. You can go to alcoholfreelifestyle.com/project90, and the link is in the show notes. Let's get back to the episode.
The follow-up question to this is, why can some people moderate? We've covered a lot of reasons for that in the earlier question. Some people can moderate in a responsible, controlled manner. I would suggest that those people are very far and few between. And even people that we observe and think can moderate their drinking, we don't know what they're doing when they get home. I was a reasonably controlled drinker in a social environment, but when I came home, that's when the real drinking began. So I really invite you not to create comparisons with other people because you never really know what's going on. Moderating can be totally exhausting. It requires setting limits, how much, how often you will drink, sticking to those limits, dealing with the cravings, negotiating, keeping on track, being mindful of how much you pour, alternating your drinks with water, avoiding any binge drinking sessions because, of course, these then lead to higher alcohol tolerance, which leads to you wanting more alcohol. Moderation may be possible for you, and I'm not saying that it isn't. But in my experience, if you are experiencing significant challenges with your drinking, then moderation or trying to moderate is going to be quite a painful process. And it's far better and far easier and far much more rewarding just not to have to worry about that anymore, not to have to expend valuable mental energy in internal negotiations and mental gymnastics about how, when, who with, how much, etc., etc. So knowing all of this, we still seem to want to go back to drinking. We know that moderation is hard for us. We know that alcohol has negative consequences, but for some reason, we keep going back. It's, again, a complicated combination of different things. But when we are dependent on a substance physically and psychologically, we often forget the negative consequences once we've had a period of time where we've been abstinent. We also start to romanticize all the good times and forget all the bad. Added to this, we see everybody drinking around us. We might feel like we're excluded. We might feel like we're not fun anymore. We might even feel like we've lost a significant part of our identity if we were the instigator of the parties or the person that kept the party going. So it's important to know that our reasons for going back to drinking are based on a false idea of what drinking has to offer us. Also, we can be triggered by so many different events or emotions that come up when we least expect them to. And because historically we've always gone to alcohol to deal with those situations, we have ingrained neural pathways that tend to walk us back down to the old ways, walk us back into old behaviours and patterns of thinking and habits. We have to remember that we've been drinking for a significant period of time in our lives, some of us 10, 20, 30, 40 years. So we can't expect for all of that to be undone over the course of a month or two. We need to have hope, but we also need to have a level of realism that if we keep going back to drinking, all we are doing is simply reinforcing these negative cycles of behaviour. And every time we give up and go back, we reinforce the idea that we have no control. So it's common over the course of somebody's alcohol-free journey for them to go back and experiment and learn that it's possibly not for them. And this is an important part of the journey. We need to learn from experience. But there has to come a point where we say doing the same thing over and over again is, I think somebody said, the definition of insanity. So we need to get realistic about whether or not we want to spend any more time in our life trying to do something that's so incredibly bad for us, putting so much effort into trying to drink a substance that has caused us so many problems. Once people remove alcohol, they can have an immediate reaction of joy. It's that sense of finally I've cracked it. I don't need to do this anymore. They start to experience benefits such as better sleep, less mental chatter, inner critic, all of those things. And it can be really, really rewarding and motivating in the early days. But after a while, people start to say that life has suddenly become dull and boring, and they can't see the possibility of living their whole lives without alcohol because it provided them with so much perceived joy in their past. So feeling like life is dull and boring without alcohol is pretty common. Primarily, this is because the brain chemistry has been altered in those days of drinking. And what that means is that we don't experience pleasure from the natural joys in life simply because they don't provide the extraordinarily unnatural burst of brain chemicals that alcohol does. Alcohol produces huge surges of chemicals like dopamine and serotonin that make us feel unnaturally good. So when we go out with our dog, go out for a walk in nature, spend time with our children, whilst we are still getting a natural high, it's nowhere near as high as the feeling that we got from drinking. This changes over time, and it's really important to know that. Life will at times be dull and boring whether you drink or not. That's just life. But finding joy in life takes time once we remove the unnatural highs of alcohol. It's important to be patient with this and to intentionally try and create and savor activities where you will find some natural joy and reinforce those by spending time feeling grateful for them and for savoring any good experiences that you have without alcohol. We also have the psychological dependence that we need to deal with, and that is part of the process of looking at our thoughts and beliefs around what alcohol was actually giving us. We tend to place a very high value on this substance. Over time, we can start to see how much value alcohol actually brought into our lives when we observe how much value we get out of life without it. If we are using alcohol to cope, then it is incredibly hard to deal with the stresses of life without it. But we really only have two choices. We can choose to go back to drinking and exacerbate all of our problems, or we can choose the path of change. It's often said that we have to choose our hard, and I think this is really important. It's hard to keep drinking. It's exhausting, it's depressing, and it really lowers our self-esteem, our value of who we are, our productivity in the world, our connection with other people. Has many, many negative consequences, and it's hard. But so is growth. So we have to choose our hard. The difference is that whilst growth is hard and challenging, it leads to extraordinary rewards. Rewards that we will never get to experience if we keep on drinking. And the final question is, what are the first steps that I need to take in order to change my relationship with alcohol? Be it whether you at this point in time would just like to take an extended break, or maybe you've decided enough is enough. It really doesn't matter what your long-term goals are at this point, because trying to decide something like this is incredibly difficult, and our brains don't like the idea of forever. So firstly, I invite you to set some very achievable goals. Goals that don't scare you too much, but goals that do stretch you. We want to come out of our comfort zone to a little bit, otherwise we just go back into our old ways. But we also don't want to push ourselves too far out of our comfort zone so that we feel scared and we don't even take the first step. So setting a goal, ideally with the support of somebody who's already done this, can be really, really powerful. Allowing somebody who's walked the path to give you some guidance can be really, really helpful. Once you've set a goal, it's extremely helpful to find support. Quitting alcohol on your own is incredibly hard, especially if you've tried many times before and not been long-term successful. Having somebody or a group of people to support you allows you to feel like you are accountable, and also when you connect with other people who've been through a similar thing, you can realize that you're not alone and that there's nothing wrong with you. It's just the fact that so many people in society are struggling, and when we come together as a group, we realize that it's not our fault and that we can help one another to get past the most challenging times. In the early days, it's especially important to have distractions and to have plans in place for times when you feel that you will likely get triggered and go back into old patterns of behaviour. So staying busy, finding things that you would like to do other than drinking is very important. There are so many things that we let go of in order to make space for drinking, and we've often forgotten about the things that we really used to enjoy doing. So see if you can find one or two things that you used to love and start doing them again. One of the amazing things about removing alcohol is that we find ourselves with a lot more time on our hands, and if we don't do anything to fill that time, we can end up finding ourselves bored and looking for something to do, and then we will go back to the go-to for those moments. Having plans for withdrawal is also extremely important if you feel like your alcohol use disorder is severe. If you've been drinking heavily, then quitting suddenly can lead to some pretty unpleasant withdrawal symptoms, and you may need to have medical supervision. So make sure that if you are considering quitting on your own, that you do seek some medical support and medical advice before doing so. Over time, especially in group coaching, you start to realize that there are many other ways that you can meet the needs that you've been meeting with drinking. We identify ways to cope with stress and emotions, to find activities that bring you joy, to find activities that you can do on a daily basis throughout your day so that you don't end up at 5 o'clock desperate to get a drink in your hand. Try to imagine what life would be like without waking up in the morning feeling regretful, tired, stressed, anxious, lethargic, demotivated, all of those things that come as a price for the short-term relief of those drinks. When you start to experience those things, you start to realize that there is so much more to life Yes, alcohol has its benefits, but they're very short term and they're very temporary. We can't deny the use and value of alcohol because it does the job. But as with every action, there is a consequence. So we need to decide which consequences we're prepared to live with. Are we prepared to live with the consequences of a 6 out of 10 kind of life? Or do we want to do a different kind of work, a more rewarding kind of work, a more fulfilling type of work, so that we can find our way towards a freer, happier, more joyful, more connected, and most of all, more peaceful life? If you have any other questions about your relationship with alcohol, you're more than welcome to get in touch with me or the team. You can reach me at sarah@alcoholfreelifestyle.com, or you can look at the information below where you will be able to contact one of our team to discuss how we might be able to help. I encourage you to take action, because living in this cycle is no way to live. There is so much more out there for you. It just takes one decision to make to start walking down the path towards real joy, real freedom, and real fulfillment. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen. This is Sarah Connolly for the Alcohol Free Lifestyle podcast.
James Swanwick here again. Thank you so much for listening to the show. I want to send you some free stuff. If you haven't yet got the Alcohol Freedom Formula, then you can get that at alcoholfreelifestyle.com/guide. The YouTube channel is alcoholfreelifestyle.com/YouTube. I put out lots of educational videos on my Instagram page at @JamesSwanwick. You can also find me on TikTok at @JamesSwanwick. If this show has benefited you, I would so appreciate you leaving a review and giving it 5 stars. We have a 5-day no alcohol challenge, a 30-day no alcohol challenge. You can get details over at alcoholfreelifestyle.com. And if you would like to apply to be part of Project 90, which is our flagship process where you get a community, 7 coaching calls per week are available to you, a like-minded community, mostly folks in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, then you are welcome to apply. You can get all the details over at alcoholfreelifestyle.com/project 90, and the details are in the show notes. Thank you again for listening. I will catch you on the next one.